It's great to see so many people interested in this issue. I think alcohol is so much a part of our cultural and national identity that it can be quite confronting to have a conversation about its place in our lives. But I think the reaction I've had to high sobriety so far suggests that it's a conversation that many people are ready to start having. And that's not to say that booze is inherently a bad thing, but I think it seems that as a community, perhaps it's time that we started to look at getting the balance right on our drinking habits. So today I'm going to talk a bit about what I learned from my year off the booze and try to unpick some of the factors that are driving our drinking culture. So how did a binge drinking health reporter come to write a book about a year off the booze? To be honest, High Sobriety was a book that came about by accident. It came after 20 years of weekend partying that started when I was an awkward teenager in Scotland, a land where teetotalism is a crime punishable by death, and it ended with a hangover that felt like it might kill me. I didn't intend to stop drinking for a whole year, and I certainly didn't plan to write a book about it, but I'm so glad that I did. To my great surprise, it was the most rewarding year of my life. I first thought about drinking a break in 2010 when I met and interviewed Chris Rain, who at the age of 22 decided to give up alcohol for a year and write a blog about it. That blog turned into Hello Sunday Morning, an online movement encouraging people to take a break from booze for 3, 6 or 12 months. When I first met Chris, who's an incredible young man, there were less than 50 bloggers writing about their experiences of life without alcohol. Today there are more than 9,000 people signed up in Australia, New Zealand, the UK and Ireland. And if you get a chance, I'd encourage you to jump on and have a look at that website. It's really inspiring to see what people can achieve when they commit to that challenge. So what Hello Sunday Morning in my year without booze taught me is not that life is necessarily better without alcohol, but that you can soar to great heights when you make that commitment to yourself to have a change. I learned to run, I found my singing voice, I discovered an inner strength that I didn't know I had, and of course I made a dream come true and wrote this book. And I learned a lot too. I learned that alcohol is something I enjoy, not something I need. I learned that my confidence and self-worth can't be measured in standard drinks. And I learned that taking booze out of the equation forces you to be fearless. I also learned that it is possible to slide along the floorboards on your knees and rock out the air guitar to Bon Jovi completely sober. Dancing without a drink to loosen me up used to terrify me, but when you take booze out of the equation, you realise that everyone else is too blind to notice anyway, so it's quite liberating. And I discovered that the liquid confidence I used to rely on to make me socially competent may in fact be little more than a placebo. In my research, I found a number of experiments which suggest that the way we act when we're drinking may have more to do with the expectations we bring with us to the pub than the physiological effects of alcohol on the body. Psychologists have shown in several studies that groups of people who were told they were drinking vodka started to display certain behaviours, becoming more confident, flirtatious and uninhibited, even when they were actually only drinking tonic water. So I think what that tells us is that when we think booze is our social elixir, a way to give us a sense of belonging and self-assurance, then it's no wonder it's easier to reach for the bottle than to fly sober. When I took booze away, I felt naked. It was very confronting to realise how much I'd relied on alcohol to get me through difficult situations. But slowly I learned that the way I'd been using booze was not always conducive to a fulfilling social life. Without alcohol, it's easy to see that sometimes a bad party is just a bad party. And it doesn't matter how much booze you pour on the situation, you can't make dull people more interesting. And when it comes to the dating scene, sobriety was illuminating to say the least. Some guys, when learning I wasn't drinking, recoiled in horror, which I think is perhaps instructive of the type of guys I used to be attracted to when I was drinking. Sober, it's much easier to spot the blokes who are interested in you for entirely the wrong reasons. Without my beer goggles turning bow to wow, it was a little bit more easy to make discerning choices. Among the other lessons I learned in my booze-free odyssey was that being drunk at the footy doesn't make Hawthorn play any better, unfortunately. And I learned that the only excuses some people will accept for you not drinking are I'm pregnant, I've just come out of rehab, or sobriety is one of my parole conditions. I also discovered that while I once used alcohol as a way to unwind after a stressful day at work or to block out difficult emotions, that's really not a great long-term strategy. having a few drinks to take the edge off, it might take the edge off, but the next morning those edges are sharper and they cut you deeper. It's rewarding to realise that without booze, you're a lot more resilient than you'd given yourself credit for. From a health perspective, I discovered some shocking truths about binge drinking. I learned that 1 in 5 cases of breast cancer is directly linked to alcohol. As someone with breast cancer on both sides of my family, I realised I was playing a pretty high-stakes game of poker with my health. But my ignorance to the facts is not uncommon. Cancer Council research shows that only 9% of Australians are aware of the link between alcohol and a range of cancers, despite it being a Group 1 carcinogen, which puts it in the same category as tobacco, asbestos, and UV radiation. Part of the problem, the public health specialist told me, is that we're a nation in denial about our drinking habits. Getting plastered at the weekend is the social norm for hundreds of thousands of Australians, I should know. 1 in 5 of us drink to get drunk. In younger drinkers, that figure rises to 60%. When you opt out of that culture, as I discovered, it can be challenging. I was told that not drinking was un-Australian, that a year without booze would be a year without mates. So why is drinking such an integral part of Australian culture? It's a complex question with no easy answer, but I think in the book I explore the ways in which the alcohol industry has helped foster the notion that being an Aussie means having a drink in your hand. Just like the tobacco companies before them, multinational alcohol companies have been quick to associate themselves with every pastime our culture values. Sport has become a key marketing platform for the industry. All of our major sporting codes are backed up by booze. Whether it's the Australian cricket team wearing VB on their baggy green caps, or the AFL's 100-year partnership with Carlton Draft, or the Wallabies sharing a rum and coke with a 7-foot-tall talking polar bear. Alcohol is entrenched in our sporting culture. The problem with that, health experts argue, is that research shows young people are influenced by that association, and this exposure to alcohol advertising from an early age desensitizes them, and it makes them more likely to start drinking. This is particularly the case if their sporting heroes are the ones promoting booze. This link is the reason that alcohol advertising is banned on television in peak children's viewing hours before 9 p.m. But here's the rub. Live sporting telecasts are exempt from the ban. That's a pretty big loophole. So the link between sport and drinking is not just at the elite level. Excuse me. Research from the Australian Drug Foundation shows that a third of 13 to 17-year-olds have engaged in unsupervised drinking at their local sporting club, where grog is often the reward for on-field success. 20% of 18 to 20-year-olds drink more than 10 drinks each time they go to their sporting club. And half of all members drink at dangerous levels on each visit. In the book, I interviewed young men who had grown up in this boozy sporting culture, and I found that for many, getting absolutely plastered after games was seen as an initiation into manhood. They talked of drinking games where they had to down 100 shots of beer in 100 minutes, and footy trips where the biggest boozers were celebrated as the biggest heroes. Of course, we can't lay the blame solely at the door of the industry for this culture, but I think we have to question the way in which alcohol is being used to promote the game. As part of a sponsorship deal with one Melbourne commercial radio station, commentators calling AFL games will count players' match statistics in beer. It's an odd experience indeed to hear the radio presenters say that Buddy Franklin has had 15 Carlton drafts for the game. You're thinking, is he drunk? What are they talking about? But it's all part of the insidious way that alcohol has crept into our sporting experience. And it's not just sport. The notion that Australia is a country built on booze, which when I unpack this in the book doesn't actually withstand scrutiny, but it's a notion that's bolstered by the industry. We see it in VB's annual Raise a Glass campaign commemorating Anzac Day. There's no doubt the campaign's for a good cause. It's raised nearly $3 million for war veterans since it was launched in 2009. But you have to wonder how much goodwill these ads buy the brewers. To have your brand associated with the most enduring symbol of nationhood, the Aussie digger, has to be worth its weight in gold from a marketing perspective. Every time you knock back a beer on Anzac Day, you're doing it for your country. The alcohol companies have been shrewd in tapping into potential new markets. We've seen it with alcohol pops, which are known in the industry as the binge drinking category. Some years ago, an alcohol marketing executive told me in a quite extraordinarily frank interview that these sugary, brightly coloured drinks were deliberately designed to mask the taste of alcohol in order to appeal to the younger, unsophisticated palate. Now, arguably, young people have always been risk takers, and many will drink before they're 18, regardless of what products are on the market. But how many of them are drinking earlier than they otherwise might have, simply because the industry has made it so appealing with alcohol that's so easy to drink? But young people are not the only ones binge drinking. I interviewed a number of mothers with young children for the book and found that although they thought their alcohol consumption would dip once they had children, many of them were using booze as a way to cope with the stress of motherhood, even though for some of them it was a counterproductive strategy, because we all know that toddlers have little regard for your hangover and the need to be quiet. So now some alcohol companies are looking to mothers as the next growth market. Australian online parenting communities are signing mums up to wine clubs, promising bottles delivered directly to the door. No more dragging the screaming toddler to the bottle shop, having people look down their nose at you, one website reads. And in the United States, not surprisingly, things have gone a step further. There you can buy the appealingly named Mommy Juice, a range of wines spruiked with the slogan, "Tuck your kids into bed, sit down and have a glass of Mommy Juice, because you deserve it." The battle for the mommy dollar in the US is so fierce that a rival company, Mommy's Time Out, recently tried to convince a court unsuccessfully that Mommy Juice's use of the word mommy to sell wine was a trademark infringement. Now, I'm all for market diversification, but it troubles me somewhat that the industry is saying that drinking is such an intrinsic part of motherhood that you need a bottle of wine just to survive it. But putting alcohol at the centre of our cultural life is something the industry is very good at. An advert on the website of Carlton United Breweries, which makes VB, Carlton Draft and Crown Lager, shows a young, attractive man walking into a bar of similarly good-looking drinkers and claims that communities are strengthened through the unique everyday bonds our beers create. I think it's worth reading in full the script to that ad, as it gives a flavour of how the industry is trying to convince us that booze is really our essential social lubricant. As the man laughs and bonds with friends and family, the voiceover says, "We're there for the little moments where people feel comfortable with who they are and who they're with, and we understand that what we make has always and will always be right there in the thick of things as people create friendships, face adversity, and enjoy prosperity. From the casual beer at the local to the grandest of celebrations, to the moment where you just want to drop back home to remember where you came from and where you belong. In fact, we believe in a society becoming too busy to pause for simple pleasures. If a whole lot more people raised a beer in friendship, the world would be a better place." Indeed. In fact, perhaps all that's required to achieve peace in the Middle East is a tray of party pies and a slab of VB. Who knows? And time and again during my research, I discovered that creating a sense of belonging and identity through their products is a key marketing strategy for alcohol companies, particularly when it comes to young people, although of course they deny that they do this. Young people are increasingly being targeted through sporting events, music festivals, social media, and it's working. A 2008 study from the University of Wollongong showed that 90% of 15 to 24-year-olds who were shown a series of alcohol adverts thought the drinks would help them have a good time. More than 2/3 felt that drinking would make them more confident, sociable, and outgoing, while 70% said that it would help them fit in. Half thought the drinks would help them succeed with the opposite sex, and 60% said it would help them feel less nervous. And that's obviously not happened by accident. This is the messages that the industry is pushing very heavily to them. And the young people I interviewed in the book backed up this research. I mean, many of them said they wish they didn't have to drink in the way that they did, and they wish they didn't have to get drunk at the weekends to have a good time, but really it would be social suicide not to, which makes me really sad. I mean, many of them are getting drunk for the same reasons I was, for confidence, for belonging, and to deal with difficult emotions. It's the only way they know. Yet we can't just point the finger at the industry for that. The more I explored the issue, the more I realised that young people are a product of their environment. They've inherited a culture that implores them to drink at every juncture. The headlines might focus on alcohol-related violence and youth binge drinking, but really this is a problem that we all own a part in. My own industry, the very people who write those headlines, has a proud boozy tradition that many of us, myself included, have revelled in. And the young people I spoke to backed that up and said that the pressure to drink wasn't just coming from their peers, but from older people around them. Their parents teach them that having a drink is the way to unwind after a tough day at work. Their colleagues chastise them if they don't hit it hard on Friday night drinks. Their sporting heroes are backed by booze and their music festivals sponsored by alcohol companies and headlined by pop stars who celebrate getting wasted. In that context, is it any wonder they drink in the way they do? What's heartening, though, is the number of young people who are choosing another way. The numbers are still small, but every year the percentage of young people who are either delaying their first drink or abstaining altogether is growing. And groups like Hello Sunday Morning are becoming more popular. As HSM founder Chris Rain says, it's easy to get swept up in a drinking culture. Sometimes you just need a rope to pull you back to dry land. So it's all very well governments and public health experts wagging the finger and telling young people not to drink or trying to scare them with adverts that warn of the consequences of risky drinking. But while they live in a community that places more value on getting drunk than it does on moderation or sobriety, they'll have little incentive to change. And I think this is the beauty of movements like Hello Sunday Morning. They show through lived experience rather than preaching or being patronising the rewards that can flow when you take a break from alcohol. That's what attracted me to it in the first place, seeing how many life goals Chris Rain was kicking and really wanting a part of that. That's why I made the change. But it's not always a welcome message. Throughout my time covering alcohol issues for The Age and the Sunday Age, I've been accused of being a wiser who won't be happy until prohibition is introduced. I guess taking a year off the booze doesn't really help with that perception. But, it's a cheap slur that does nothing to really further what is an important conversation, yet it's indicative of how firmly entrenched our drinking culture is in the national psyche, that this is what you face when you opt out of it, even temporarily. So I think if we want young Australians to have a healthier relationship with alcohol, we need to stop condemning people who choose to drink moderately or not at all. Before I took my own break from the grog, I was guilty of pressuring friends and colleagues into drinking when they didn't really want to. I think collectively we need to ask ourselves why we do that, and maybe just think about not doing that. Industry and governments can play their part by looking at the cost of alcohol. It's cheaper and more readily available than ever before, and they need to stop treating booze as if it were an ordinary commodity, as benign as tea or butter. And that's not to say that we should demonise alcohol. I think we should all remember that having a few drinks can be a lot of fun. And from a personal perspective, it's led me to new friends and some wild and wacky experiences, none of which I'd ever want to replace, and I'm sure I'll have more in the future. But my relationship with alcohol now is a healthier one. And I don't live like a nun. I still have big nights out from time to time, and I don't always drink within the national guidelines. But the difference now, I think, is that these days those crazy adventures are a choice and not an accident. And I think I can say with a degree of confidence that I will never again wake up with a hangover. It's so horrendous it feels like I've been hit by the 86 tram. So that's what I hope that High Sobriety highlights, that it is possible to take a break from drinking and still have a rewarding and full life. I hope that it can trigger conversations about the place of alcohol in our cultural life. And I hope that in a country awash with booze, movements like Hello Sunday Morning will continue to grow and offer us that rope back to dry land. Because ultimately I believe that this is how you change a culture, one person at a time. Thanks very much.